It started with whispers, always when the rain began. Elsie would pause right in the middle of playing and tilt her head. She'd say, "He's listening again." From inside the wall, Grace thought it was just a child's way of coping with the move, the divorce, the isolation. But then Elsie began insisting she couldn't sleep alone. Not couldn't. She said she felt breathing on her face in the dark, that the man behind the wall was watching through the cracks, and on more than one night. Grace found her curled at the foot of her bed, arms around her knees, eyes open but unfocused, like she was waiting. It became a pattern. The tapping sounds always came just after 3:11 a.m. Faint at first, like water dripping behind the drywall. But when Grace leaned in, she could hear it wasn't random. It had rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Always 3 sets. Always at 3:15 a.m. She started to dread that hour, lying awake, listening, waiting for the sound. Once she tried recording it, but the audio always came out blank, just rain, wind, nothing unusual. One afternoon while Elsie was at school, Grace decided to check the attic, just to ease her nerves. The pull-down stairs creaked like they hadn't moved in years. A smell hit her first, like damp wood and something older, sour. The air was thick and unmoving. The flashlight barely cut through the dust, but it was enough to see the beams overhead, and on 3 of them, symbols, not words, not drawings, something in between. Circles inside triangles, small marks that almost looked burned into the wood. She took a photo and showed it to a local hardware store owner. He shrugged. "Old farm stuff," he said. "Some used to carve signs like that to keep weevils and mice away." But Grace couldn't stop thinking about them. One of the symbols matched something in Elsie's drawings. Something in the corner of the page she'd scribbled and never explained. Things got stranger from there. A few times Grace could swear she heard Elsie whispering even when she wasn't home, and the whisper was always coming from her room. One night, while putting away groceries, she thought she heard a quiet hello coming from behind the kitchen wall. The voice was thin, high-pitched, like a child. She froze, listening. It didn't come again. Then, one morning Grace went to hang some of Elsie's clothes. The closet was stiff. It always stuck on humid days. But this time it opened too easily. The air inside was colder, and something on the inner wall caught her eye. It was a bird, dead, nailed to the wood paneling, wings stretched out unnaturally. She gasped and dropped the basket, stepped back. There were no tools in the house, no hammer, no nails. She called the police, but they found no signs of forced entry, no prints, no explanation. The officer, young, polite, just looked at her and said, "You sure it wasn't already there?" Grace didn't answer, because she'd cleaned that closet herself. Just days earlier, on cue, the knocking came again. But this time, it wasn't from the walls. It came from under the bed. There was something about the rain in Cold Springs that didn't feel natural. It didn't wash things away. It made things rise. Voices, memories, shadows, and something else that was learning to speak. On a Monday night, after another sleepwalking episode, Grace decided to monitor her daughter's room. Not for security, not for safety. She wanted proof. Something to explain the sounds she'd been hearing in the walls. The whispering, the knocks. She placed the baby monitor under Elsie's bed and turned it on. That night it rained harder than it had in weeks. The first night's audio was quiet, just static, and the occasional creak of floorboard. But around 3:12 a.m., a voice, clearly a child's, asked, "Are you still there?" Grace's heart stopped. The voice wasn't Elsie's. She replayed it 5 times. Same words, same tone, same impossible source. The second night, there were 2 voices. One pleading, one commanding. They didn't speak to Grace. They spoke to each other, as if they had been waiting for Elsie to listen. That's when Grace stopped sleeping entirely. She would walk the same hallway, stop near the attic door, and begin to draw spirals with ash from the fireplace. No color, no smiley faces, just black spirals, always counterclockwise, always in sets of 3. On the 4th storm, the phone line died. Grace wasn't surprised, but when the technician came 2 days later, he didn't bring a replacement wire. He just stared at the box for a long time, then said, "There's no damage from weather. It's not frayed like wind would do. This looks shredded, like someone clawed it." Pause. Rain softened. There were no animals big enough on the property, and the box was bolted shut. At 3:11 p.m., in the middle of a clear afternoon, the monitor turned itself on. Grace hadn't touched it. Elsie was asleep. No storm, no reason, but the voice returned, and it wasn't alone. The first few nights, the recorder picked up rain creaks in the boards. Maybe a whisper too faint to catch, but one night, clarity. A voice called out slow, deliberate. "Elsie, look under." In the deathly stillness, it was clear. No static, no distortion, just a voice from behind plaster. The next morning, Elsie was found in her room, pale and trembling. Her drawing showed a trap door right under her bed. Grace searched cabinet floors, beneath towels, corners under the bed. Nothing. No trap door. No sign it ever existed. Grace began seeing spots, calls her dizziness. Then came the headaches, migraines so severe she couldn't function, and the nosebleeds always at night, always after the recorder stopped. When she visited a doctor, everything was normal. Blood work, scans, heart rate. He said it was stress. She knew it wasn't just that. On the 5th night, Grace lay awake. The rain was light outside, but inside something woke her. Scratching, slow, methodical. Following the sound, she made her way to Elsie's room. The hallway stretched unnaturally. The air smelled of wet plaster, and something else, stale, old. She cracked the door, and heard it. Grace froze. The voice, definite. She felt it against her chest as if an unseen presence leaned over her shoulder. But when she stepped in, no one was there. Just the recorder on the floor, blinking rec in red. That night, Grace recorded without stopping, because she realized this wasn't just noise from the walls. It was communication. They were talking to her, and to Elsie, something had awakened, and now, it was guiding. Grace realized this wasn't just a haunting. It was personal. She needed to know why. So she dug into the house's history. The house was built in 1943 by Amos Lilliand, a carpenter, who arrived in Cold Springs quietly, known only as a man of wood, tools, and timber. He never married, rarely spoke. He was a recluse islanded within his own property and quiet routines. In 1951, a decade later, a local 8-year-old named Sarah disappeared. She vanished while walking through a nearby thicket. A massive search turned up nothing. No footprints, no clothes, no clues. A rumor swirled that Amos Lillian's house had something to do with it. Whispers of the Lillian child. Nothing confirmed. No indictment. No arrest. Only whispers and the house. Grace found an article tucked in an old paper from 1953. Neighbors reported screams echoing from within the walls. They heard a child crying and banging, locked inside the house's walls, or so they say. It was never followed up. The Lillian property changed hands, the story buried. Grace came across a photograph of Amos, hammer in hand, smudges of sawdust on his shirt, but his eyes gone, blacked out. Someone had erased them from history. She wondered if whoever did this knew more than just woodwork. Grace realized the patterns were repeating. Sarah, 8. Elsie, 8. Screams, walls. The same phrasing in Elsie's drawings. The same scratches on the beams that matched farm symbols from the 50s. Symbols used to seal something in, or out. Sarah's disappearance was never solved, and Amos Lillian died alone. 2 years later, from an overdose of unknown origins, the town whispered of guilt, curses, inheritance, and walls that stored secrets too deep to tell. Grace stared at the baby monitor recording again that night. "Look under," it had said. But what else could it have meant? Under the walls, under the floorboards, under history. As rain poured outside, she realized this isn't over. It's only the beginning. Grace knew the whispers were telling her something, but she didn't know what until she made a choice. A desperate one. At 2:46 a.m., Grace ripped out the panel behind Elsie's bed. Behind it, nothing but empty space, until the beam of her flashlight caught an edge. A wooden box, rough hewn, locked but unlocked by nails removed moments ago. Inside were 4 things. A little girl's shoe too small for Elsie, worn with scuffs and scratches. A single dried rose dead for decades, but perfectly preserved, like a message from the past. And a photograph. A smiling child. The writing on the back. "Keep her quiet." Beneath it all, a cassette tape, white label, block letters. "Listen alone." The words persistent, sentient, like someone speaking from inside the box, from the walls. "Are you?" Grace almost dropped the tape. Her hands shook. There was history here, blood memory in wood fibers. The shoe likely belonged to Sarah, or someone else. Hidden inside walls with a box like this. The photo suggested someone had watched these walls, watched Grace and Elsie, observed, waited, and listened. Grace stepped back. The walls felt alive under her fingertips, and in that darkness, she saw something, at the corner of her vision. A shape, not Elsie, not a person, just something watching. Upstairs, Elsie stirred. The cassette was still in Grace's hand, and then, the rain stopped. Silence, and something whispered from behind the walls. "She's listening too." But something about this house, the way the walls seemed to breathe at night, the way the rain wouldn't stop, was starting to break her. She stopped sleeping, not from insomnia but from fear. Every time her eyes closed, she'd jolt awake, certain she heard someone whispering her name, right next to her ear. She started missing time. 10 minutes here, an hour there. Once, she realized she'd driven to the edge of town and parked, with no memory of getting in the car. Then came the phone call. Elsie's teacher, Mrs. Kenner, sounded concerned. Elsie had stopped speaking at school. She didn't cry, didn't throw tantrums. She just sat, unmoving, drawing circles on her desk, sometimes looking toward corners of the room, like she was listening to someone no one else could hear. When Grace asked her why she wouldn't talk at school, Elsie gave a soft smile. "Sarah says they wouldn't understand." Grace froze. That name again. Sarah. She remembered the old newspaper clipping, the missing girl from 1951. Rumors that she was never found. But Elsie didn't know about that. Grace had kept the research to herself. So how did she know the name? Grace set up the baby monitor again. She hit record. This time she didn't sleep at all. Just sat in the hallway, lights off, headphones in, and just before 2 a.m., the whisper came. "She's listening, stop her." There were 2 voices, both young. One was Elsie's, the other wasn't. It was slightly off, like someone mimicking a child. The cadence was wrong, the tone too flat. Grace replayed the old cassette again, the one she had burned. She'd made a digital copy on her phone, just in case. This time she listened all the way to the end. First, white noise. Then the same voice whispering, "We'll be quiet now. Are you?" Then the scream. It didn't sound like a scream of pain. It sounded like fear, utter terror. Then complete silence. No static, no wind, just dead air. Grace sat frozen for 5 minutes before she realized something else was wrong. The hallway light was off. She hadn't turned it off. And Elsie's bed was empty. Again, shoeless. Gone. No doors open. No footprints. Grace called her name through the house. No answer. She checked every closet, every room. Nothing. Then she heard it. The drip. Steady. Soft. From the back hallway. She followed it with a flashlight. And there, standing in the mudroom, barefoot and expressionless, was Elsie. She didn't look at her mother. Didn't move. Her face was streaked with ash. Her hands were black with it. The floor was covered in spirals. And then Elsie looked up and said quietly, she went back under. That night, Grace locked all the doors, nailed them shut. She didn't sleep. She sat in Elsie's room until sunrise, holding her daughter, watching the wall, waiting. By the second week of October, the rain hadn't stopped in 6 days. Not a break, not a breeze, just water pressing down on the house like a weight. The entire valley was drenched. Flood warnings stretched across Cold Spring, but the Wilburn house felt detached from it all, as if it were sealed in its own pocket of time. Grace had boarded up Elsie's bedroom, not for safety, but because she said the voice had started to answer her. Not just Elsie. It was no longer just whispers on the baby monitor, she told a neighbor. It said my name when I stood in the hallway. It asked where Elsie was. She stopped eating. She wore the same clothes for 4 days. Her eyes, once soft and warm, became dull and fixed on corners no one else looked at. Grace placed a camera in the hallway, pointed directly at Elsie's bedroom door. She left one candle burning. The rest of the house remained dark. The digital clock on the monitor flicked past midnight. 1 a.m., 2 a.m. At exactly 3:13 a.m., the monitor blinked, static, then black. Then came the sound of the door creaking. Though no one was near it, the feed returned, grainy, distorted, and a shape stepped out of the closet. Not walked, stepped, its body long and narrow, like it hadn't moved in decades. The candle's flame bent toward it. Elsie was already awake, sitting up, smiling. The voice didn't speak this time, but Grace, frozen in the hallway, later told investigators she was mouthing something. The audio didn't catch it, but her lips said, "He's out now." The closet behind her yawned open, wider than it had ever appeared during the day. Inside, the darkness moved. When Grace rushed in, the candle had gone out. Elsie had laid back down, fast asleep. But when Grace turned the monitor screen toward herself, the video was frozen on a frame of her own face, taken from behind, though no other camera was in the house. In the morning, a final cassette tape was discovered on the hallway floor. It hadn't been there the night before. On the label, scrawled in childlike handwriting, "Don't listen." Grace, against her better judgment, played the first 5 seconds. It began with a sound she couldn't explain, like someone breathing through dirt. Then faintly a child's voice whispered, "She opened the wall for us," followed by a voice that sounded like her own, distorted and doubled, repeating, "Don't look under, don't look under, don't look under." She turned the tape off. She never played it again. That was the last night they stayed in the house. They left the house before dawn. No moving van, no goodbyes. Grace drove with one hand on the wheel and the other, holding Elsie's. Neither of them looked back. The house sat still for months. The boards remained nailed to the bedroom door. Mail piled up, windows fogged from the inside. A realtor finally listed it as in need of repair. A contracting company was hired for full renovation. Grace never returned, but the walls still remembered. During demolition, the crew discovered the interior of the bedroom wall behind where Elsie's bed once rested was stuffed with insulation, rotted fabric, and something else. One of the guys thought it was a doll's hand. A worker told a local news blogger, but it broke when we touched it. It was hollow inside, and it didn't feel like plastic. Over 24 fragments of bone were removed from between the studs. Small, human, likely from a child. A jaw fragment with 2 missing front teeth, 3 ribs thin as twigs, and a vertebrae filed smooth at the ends. They say the house has new owners now. A young couple, no kids, not yet. They say the attic's been repainted, the closet redone, the boards replaced. The old cassette player was thrown out and the baby monitor left behind. But they also say on some nights when the storm lingers over Cold Springs, you can still hear it, dripping water from the attic, even if it hasn't rained in weeks. And if you stand in the hallway just long enough, hold your breath and listen. If this story followed you into the dark, and you're still listening through the rain, there's more waiting for you. Subscribe to Dark Whispers by Jalen, where true horror is never far, and the next story might already be whispering your name.